Imperium was breaking. Horus had turned against his father. Istvan V had shattered 3 loyal legions. Calth had burned. The Ruinstorm had swallowed the stars. And across the galaxy, the Emperor's sons were being forced to make impossible choices. Some chose loyalty. Some chose power. Some chose survival. Roboute Guilliman chose order. That was who he was. The Avenging Son, the architect of Ultramar. The Primarch who believed every disaster could be understood, measured, contained, and answered. But Calth had taught him something terrifying. Some betrayals could not be predicted. Some wounds could not be organized away. And some enemies did not fight like soldiers. They fought like ghosts. On Macragge, the scars of Calth were everywhere. Not only in the wounded ships limping into orbit, not only in the refugees filling the halls of the capital, not only in the reports of dead worlds and broken fleets. The scars were in the air itself. At night, people heard footsteps in empty corridors. Strange music echoed through abandoned rooms. A psaltery playing where no musician stood. Servants whispered of ghosts. Soldiers muttered about the warp. Guilliman listened to all of it. He did not believe in ghosts. He believed in causes, in systems, in data. So he searched for explanations. Warp resonance, psychological trauma, atmospheric distortion, anything rational, anything that meant the universe still obeyed rules. Then, for the first time in 2 years, a true light appeared in the sky above Macragge. Not a storm flare, not a dying ship. A star, one point of impossible brightness burning through the red darkness of the Ruinstorm. To the people of Macragge, it looked like hope. To Guilliman, it looked like a solution. The light came from Sotha, a distant world on the eastern edge of human space. Long ago, colonization had been halted there after ancient Xenos ruins were discovered beneath Mount Pharos. The structure was old beyond imperial understanding. Not human, not mechanicum, something else, something older. Guarding it was the Ultramarines' 199th Ajita Company. But the man who had unlocked its true purpose was not an Ultramarine. He was Barabas Dantioch, a loyalist iron warrior, a traitor to his own traitor legion, an exile wearing the iron mask of a man who had lost everything except duty. Dantioch discovered that the Pharos was not merely a beacon. It was a machine of impossible reach. A device that did not rely on the warp. A system of instant communication and navigation based on forces even the mechanicum barely understood. Quantum resonance, empathic alignment, need. When Dantioch activated it, the Pharos did what the Astronomican no longer could. It pierced the storm. It made Macragge visible. It gave the lost something to follow. Guilliman hated relying on Xenos technology, but hatred did not change reality. Terra was hidden. The Astronomican was gone. Ultramar was isolated. If his realm was to survive, he needed that light. So he gave the order. Light Macragge, and across the storm, the Pharos answered. Ships began arriving, broken ships, lost ships, warships that had been wandering blind through madness. Among them came space wolves aboard the waning Crescent, Their leader was Fafnir Bloodbroder, and he carried a message that would have sounded absurd in any other age. He and his watch pack had been sent by Leman Russ and Malthador. Their mission was to observe every Primarch, to watch for signs of treachery, and, if necessary, to kill them. When Fafnir delivered that order to Guilliman's face, the hall went silent. Guilliman laughed. Not because it was funny, because after everything that had happened, even this was possible now. A pack of space wolves standing in his court, claiming the right to judge him, claiming the right to sanction him. The old Imperium was dead. This was the new one, a galaxy where even loyal brothers had to be watched. And Guilliman, surrounded by refugees, ghosts, and a storm that had swallowed Terra, began to understand the truth. If the Emperor's light could no longer reach them, then Macragge would have to become a light of its own. The Pharos did exactly what Guilliman had hoped. It became a lighthouse in a galaxy without one. Across the Ruinstorm, ships that had wandered blind for months finally found a destination. One after another, battered fleets emerged above Macragge, their hulls scarred, their crews exhausted. Many had entered the warp expecting journeys of weeks. Instead, they had spent months trapped inside living nightmares. Among the first to arrive was the Waning Crescent, a small Space Wolves courier vessel that looked as though it had survived the end of the universe. Its engines were barely functioning. Its armor was torn open in dozens of places. Half its crew had died before reaching Ultramar. The survivors were led by Fafnir Bloodbroder, a veteran watchpack leader whose orders came directly from Leman Russ. He hadn't crossed the Ruinstorm to seek refuge. He had come to deliver a warning. Day after day, Guilliman personally welcomed every fleet that reached Macragge. Ultramarines, Iron Hands, White Scars, Raven Guard. Fragments of shattered legions slowly gathered around Ultramar like survivors crawling toward the last fire left in the night. Each arrival brought another piece of terrible news. Ferrus Manus was dead. Vulkan had vanished. Corax was missing. Magnus had fallen. Perturabo had joined Horus. No one knew whether Terra still stood. No one knew if the Emperor still lived. Every report made the galaxy seem smaller, and the darkness larger. Eventually, Fafnir was summoned before Guilliman. The audience chamber emptied. Only a handful of officers remained. The Space Wolf stepped forward without kneeling. Many Ultramarines reached for their weapons. Fafnir ignored them. He presented a sealed order bearing the sigils of both Leman Russ and Malthador. Guilliman broke the seal, read the message, then laughed. Not because it amused him, because it perfectly reflected the madness consuming the Imperium. "You've come to watch me?" he asked. Fafnir didn't hesitate. "If you betray the Emperor, we've been ordered to stop you." Silence filled the chamber. Every Ultramarine present understood what those words meant. A handful of space wolves, threatening a Primarch, threatening Roboute Guilliman himself. The Avenging Son studied Fafnir for several long seconds, then asked quietly, "And do you truly believe your little pack could kill me?" Fafnir met his gaze without fear. "Probably not, but we'd try. If we die doing what Russ ordered." Guilliman looked around the chamber. No deception, no politics, no hidden agenda, only brutal honesty. It was strangely refreshing. After Erebus, after Cor Pharaon, after Alpha Legion infiltrators, after everything Calth had taught him, simple honesty had become a rare thing. Instead of taking offense, Guilliman smiled. "Then stay. I'd rather have an honest enemy beside me than a false friend behind me." Fafnir remained, not as a prisoner, not as a guest, as a reminder. A reminder that trust had become the rarest resource left in the Imperium. Yet while Guilliman strengthened Macragge's defenses, someone else had already entered his realm unnoticed. Someone who carried no legion banner, no imperial oath, no loyalty except to a secret older than the Imperium itself. His name was John Grammaticus, and before long, Macragge would discover that the Horus Heresy was no longer being fought only by Primarchs and legions. Ancient powers had begun making their own moves. John Grammaticus had once believed he was saving humanity. Now, he wasn't sure humanity deserved to be saved. Long before Horus declared his rebellion, John had served an ancient alliance known as the Cabal, a secret coalition of alien races. Their goal was simple: end chaos, at any cost. The Cabal believed humanity itself had become the greatest fuel for the warp. Their solution was horrifying: allow Horus to win. Let mankind destroy itself. Without humanity, chaos would eventually starve. John had believed them for years. Then he watched the Horus Heresy unfold. World after world burned. Billions died. And still, chaos only grew stronger. The Cabal had been wrong. Now John intended to stop them. He arrived at Macragge under a false identity, a weary refugee from Calth, another broken soul fleeing the Ruinstorm. Nobody questioned him. Thousands of refugees entered the city every day. One more exhausted survivor meant nothing. That anonymity was exactly what John needed. His real objective lay inside Macragge itself. To reach it, he first had to reach orbit. Using subtle psychic suggestion, he manipulated frightened workers, exhausted officers, and overworked officials. Doors opened. Records disappeared. Questions went unasked. Eventually, he assumed the identity of an Imperial intelligence officer named Teo Lusulk. With stolen authorization codes and forged credentials, John boarded a funeral transport descending toward the capital. The deception worked perfectly. Within hours, he stood inside Macragge's civitas. But John wasn't the only player moving through the shadows. One evening, while sitting alone in a quiet tavern, the impossible happened. Time stopped. Wine froze in midair. Candles stopped flickering. Every conversation fell silent. The entire room became perfectly still. Only one figure continued walking. Tall, elegant, ancient beyond imagination. Eldrad Ulthran, the greatest farseer of Ulthwé. John stared at the Eldar without reaching for a weapon. There was no point. If Eldrad wanted him dead, he would already be dead. Instead, the farseer spoke calmly. Years earlier, Eldrad had hidden memories deep within John's mind. Now he unlocked them. Forgotten instructions resurfaced all at once. John finally remembered why he had truly come to Ultramar. Then, Eldrad revealed something even more disturbing. The Cabal is wrong. They no longer seek balance. They seek extinction. John listened in silence. Everything he had sacrificed, everything he believed, everything he had done, had been built upon a lie. Then Eldrad delivered one final warning. There is another hunter on Macragge. He is already looking for you. Time began moving again. The tavern returned to life. People laughed, drank, continued conversations they never realized had paused. John remained seated, his glass untouched. For the first time in centuries, a perpetual felt something dangerously close to fear. Because if Eldrad was right, someone already knew he was here. And somewhere inside the heart of Macragge, the hunt had already begun. The hunter's name was Barthusa Narek. Once he had been a proud warrior of the Word-bearers. Now he hunted his own legion. Narek had watched Lorgar's sons surrender themselves to chaos. He had watched brothers willingly offer their bodies to demons. Watched warriors abandon everything they once believed. He refused to follow them. His faith in the Emperor was gone. His faith in Lorgar was dead. But his hatred remained. Above all, he hated what the Word-bearers had become. His true target was Lorgar himself. To kill a Primarch required more than courage. It required a weapon unlike any other. John Grammaticus carried it, a Fulgurite spear, forged from the Emperor's own psychic lightning during the Unification Wars. One of the few weapons capable of permanently killing a perpetual. Or perhaps even a Primarch. That was why Narek had come to Macragge. Not to aid chaos, not to save the Imperium, to claim the spear. Nothing else mattered. He couldn't reach John alone, so he made a bargain. Not with allies, with monsters. Two former word-bearers who had surrendered themselves completely to the warp. Ulkas Tul, Barbos Ka. They were no longer truly space marines. Their bodies belonged to demons now. Narek despised them, but for the moment, they were useful. Deep beneath Macragge's great scriptorium, the creatures performed an ancient ritual. An athame carved through reality itself. The air split apart. Stone screamed. A wound opened between the materium and the warp. Sulfur poured into the chamber. Flies filled the air. The smell of decay spread through the corridors. One by one, the three stepped through. They had entered Macragge unnoticed. The demons believed they were partners. Narek let them think so, until they were no longer necessary. Without warning, he raised his bolter. One shot. Barabas Dantioch's head disappeared in a cloud of shattered ceramite and black blood. Before Ulka's tool could react, Narek's Brontos-patterned sniper rifle fired. The second creature collapsed beside the first. The entire alliance had lasted only minutes. Narek looked down at the corpses without emotion. I never said we were brothers. He cleaned his weapon, then continued walking. There was only one objective left. Find John Grammaticus. Take the Fulgurite. Kill Lorgar. Meanwhile, only a few hundred meters away, another assassination was already unfolding. This one targeted not a word-bearer, not a perpetual, but Roboute Guilliman himself. And unlike Narek, these killers had spent months preparing for the perfect deception. The assassin wore the face of a hero. That was what made the plan so dangerous. Months earlier, Sergeant Tyranids Awaken had become one of the greatest heroes of Calth. He had survived the betrayal, saved countless Ultramarines, earned Guilliman's personal respect. Everyone on Macragge knew his name, which made him the perfect disguise. The warriors requesting an audience with Guilliman looked exactly like veterans returning from Calth. Their armor carried authentic battle damage. Their shields were scarred. Even their gladius blades bore the wear of desperate fighting. Nothing appeared out of place, because nothing had been left to chance. They were Alpha Legion, masters of infiltration, masters of deception. They hadn't simply copied Teal's appearance. They had studied him. His speech, his movements, his history. Every detail had been recreated perfectly. When word reached Guilliman that Tyranids had returned, the Primarch didn't hesitate. He welcomed his old hero personally, without armor, without a bodyguard. It was exactly what the assassins had hoped for. The chamber doors sealed behind them. Hidden signal jammers activated. Every communication channel died instantly. For one brief moment, no one outside knew what was happening inside. The false Teal smiled, then drew his bolter. The room erupted into gunfire. Bolt shells hammered toward the Primarch at point-blank range. Guilliman reacted faster than any mortal could comprehend. Before the first round struck him, he seized a massive hardwood strategy table and flipped it upright. Explosive bolts tore through the ancient wood. Splinters filled the chamber. The table wouldn't last. Neither would standing still. Guilliman charged. One Alpha Legionnaire barely managed to raise his weapon before the Primarch reached him. The punch shattered his breastplate, then his ribcage, then the wall behind him. Another assassin lunged with a power blade. Guilliman caught the warrior by the wrist, twisted. Bone snapped. The sword fell. The Primarch drove it straight back through its owner's chest. The remaining infiltrators spread out. This had never been a duel. It was an execution. 10 against 1. Bolter fire echoed through the chamber as Guilliman moved with terrifying speed. Even unarmored, even wounded, a Primarch was still a Primarch. Outside, Ultramarines pounded against the sealed doors. They could hear the explosions, the gunfire, the impacts. But the Alpha Legion's jamming field blocked every override. No one could get inside. Within the chamber, blood covered the marble floor. Guilliman had already killed several attackers, but he wasn't untouched. Bolt rounds had torn into his shoulders. Blood streamed from his neck. Fragments of ceramite and wood covered his body. The assassins had failed to kill him quickly. Now they only hoped to kill him at all. Then their leader stepped forward. He leveled his blade at the Primarch's throat and quietly spoke the words that had followed the Alpha Legion since the beginning of the heresy. I am Alpharius. The duel entered its final moments, and neither side intended to leave the room alive. The Alpha Legion had planned everything, except fighting a Primarch. Guilliman tore through the chamber like a living weapon. One assassin tried to flank him. The Primarch seized him by the throat, lifted him effortlessly from the ground, and hurled him across the room. The warrior crashed into a marble pillar hard enough to shatter both stone and ceramite. Another charged with a power sword. Guilliman stepped inside the strike. His fist crushed the warrior's elbow. The blade slipped from numb fingers. A heartbeat later, the Primarch drove that same sword through the assassin's chest. Outside the chamber, Ultramarines finally breached the sealed doors. The signal jammers had failed. By the time the guards reached their lord, the battle was already over. 5 infiltrators lay dead. The rest were either dying or captured. Guilliman himself remained standing, barely. His body was riddled with bolt wounds. Blood soaked his robes. Even a Primarch could not walk away from point-blank bolter fire unharmed. As apothecaries rushed toward him, Guilliman gave only one order: find out how they got this close. The attack had failed, but it had proven something terrifying. Macragge was no longer safe. The enemy no longer needed armies. A handful of infiltrators had almost killed one of the Emperor's greatest sons. While the palace struggled to recover, another mystery arrived from the heavens. Without warning, every orbital defense station detected an object entering Macragge's atmosphere. No ship, no transponder, no engine signature. Only a blazing mass descending at impossible speed. The defense grid should have destroyed it. Instead, it slipped through untouched. The object slammed into the industrial district south of the capital. The impact flattened factories and sent shockwaves across the city. At first, everyone assumed it was another weapon, perhaps a traitor warhead. Perhaps an escape pod. Perhaps another assassination attempt. Tetrarch Valentus Dolor immediately secured the impact site. Heavy servitors dug through molten rock and shattered ferrocrete. The object had buried itself 6 levels beneath the surface. Hours later, they reached it. It wasn't a bomb. It wasn't a machine. It was a body. Massive. Burned beyond recognition. The flesh had been carbonized by atmospheric entry. Every bone appeared shattered. Every organ should have been destroyed. No being in the galaxy could have survived such an impact. Yet something about the corpse disturbed the apothecaries. The body was too large for a space marine, too heavily built for any human, almost Primarch-sized. The remains were transported to the palace under maximum security, placed inside a reinforced medical casket, connected to every life monitor the apothecarian possessed. No one expected the instruments to detect anything. The corpse was dead. It had to be. Then, several hours later, the monitors began to scream. Against every law of biology, new muscle tissue began growing. Burned flesh regenerated before the physician's eyes. Bone knitted itself back together. The impossible was happening. Something, or someone, was coming back to life. The impossible had happened. The corpse was alive. Apothecaries gathered around the reinforced casket in stunned silence as the burned flesh slowly repaired itself. Blackened muscle regenerated. Broken bones fused together. New skin spread across ruined tissue. Every medical instrument insisted the same thing. The body was healing. Guilliman arrived only minutes later. Though still recovering from the Alpha Legion assassination attempt, he immediately recognized what lay inside the chamber. The size, the physiology, the sheer presence. There were only a handful of beings in the galaxy built like this. A Primarch. Beside him stood Chief Librarian Titus Prato. Neither spoke. They simply watched. Then the figure's eyes opened. Violent, wild, completely without recognition. The Primarch hurled himself against the reinforced glass. The entire chamber shook. Again and again. Every strike left fractures across armor-grade transparasteel that should have resisted orbital bombardment. The guards instinctively raised their weapons. The figure inside wasn't trying to escape. It was trying to kill. Then it spoke. Only one word, again and again. Curze. Nothing else, only that name, filled with hatred, with agony, with a need for vengeance that bordered on madness. Moments later, the containment wall finally broke. The Primarch burst through the shattered chamber. Ultramarines rushed forward. The first was thrown into a wall hard enough to crush his armor. Another disappeared beneath a single swing. None of them could stop him. Not because they lacked courage, because they were trying not to kill him. Guilliman refused to order lethal force. He knew who this was, or at least, who he believed it was. Only one Primarch had been reported dead at Istvan, whose body had never truly been recovered. Only one was said to possess an almost impossible gift. Vulkan, Primarch of the Salamanders, the Lord of Drakes. Somehow, he had survived. But survival had come at a terrible price. Months of torture beneath Konrad Curze, repeated deaths, repeated resurrections. pain beyond imagination. His mind had finally broken. This wasn't the Vulkan Guilliman remembered. This was an animal driven by a single obsession. Curze. Nothing else mattered. Not Ultramar, not Horus, not the Imperium. Only revenge. Before anyone could organize a pursuit, Vulkan smashed through another wall and disappeared into the vast corridors of the palace. Hundreds of Ultramarines spread out in pursuit. None of them knew where he was going. Only Vulkan did. Somewhere inside Macragge, Konrad Curze was hiding. The Night Haunter had escaped the Dark Angels, escaped the Lion, escaped justice itself. Now, without realizing it, he had become the prey. And somewhere in the darkness of the palace, two Primarchs were already hunting each other. Konrad Curze had been on Macragge long before anyone realized it. After escaping the Dark Angel's flagship, Invincible Reason, the Night Haunter had slipped onto the planet unnoticed. He moved exactly as he always had. Not like a soldier, like a predator. He hid within forgotten tunnels beneath the palace, abandoned maintenance shafts, collapsed service corridors, places where even the Ultramarines rarely ventured. From there, he watched. He studied. He waited. Every guard rotation, every patrol route, every weakness. Whenever an isolated sentry disappeared, another rumor spread through the palace. Some spoke of ghosts, others blamed warp creatures. The truth was simpler. Curze was hunting. He didn't merely kill his victims, he displayed them. Bodies were suspended from ceilings, skinned, broken, left where they would inevitably be discovered. Fear spread exactly as he intended, because fear had always been his greatest weapon. While the palace searched for the Night Haunter, Curze searched for someone else. Terra Uten, the woman who had raised Roboute Guilliman. Not by blood, by love. To Guilliman, she was family. Curze knew that. He had no interest in military objectives, no interest in strategy. He wanted to hurt his brother in the deepest way possible. Meanwhile, Vulkan continued rampaging through the palace. His madness left destruction wherever he passed. Walls collapsed beneath his fists, doors exploded from their hinges, entire squads of Ultramarines were thrown aside like children. Yet despite everything, he never attacked civilians. His instincts still guided him toward one target. Curze. The hunt accelerated. One hunter driven by madness, the other by calculated cruelty. Eventually, their paths crossed. Curze had already cornered Terra Uten inside one of the palace towers. The elderly woman stood her ground despite the towering monster before her. The Night Haunter smiled. He enjoyed courage almost as much as terror. His lightning claws slowly extended. Just before he struck, the wall behind him exploded. Stone filled the chamber. A massive figure burst through the dust. Vulkan. Neither Primarch spoke. Neither needed to. Curze recognized the face immediately. For the first time in a very long while, the Night Haunter looked genuinely surprised. "You," he whispered. Vulkan answered with a roar. Then the two brothers collided. The impact shattered the tower. Windows burst outward. Entire sections of the palace collapsed beneath their weight. Servants fled. Ultramarines rushed toward the sound. Too late. The duel had already begun. High above Macragge, two Primarchs fought once again. Not for the Imperium, not for Horus, not for victory. One fought for revenge, the other simply because violence was the only language he still understood. The battle spread across the rooftops of Macragge. Snow mixed with ash as two Primarchs tore through towers that had stood for centuries. Curze was faster. His movements were impossible to predict. He vanished into shadows, reappeared behind Vulkan. His lightning claws carved deep into the salamander's flesh again and again. Any other warrior would have died within seconds. Vulkan didn't. Every wound closed almost as quickly as it opened. Bones reformed. Burned flesh regenerated. The Night Haunter had spent months torturing Vulkan aboard his flagship. He knew exactly what he was facing. "You still won't die," Curze hissed. Vulkan didn't answer. He barely seemed capable of speech. His world had narrowed to a single purpose: find Curze, destroy Curze. Nothing else existed. The salamander swung Guilliman's ancient war hammer with terrifying force. Curze leapt aside just before the weapon smashed through an entire section of the palace roof. Stone and marble exploded into the streets below. The duel climbed higher, across shattered towers, over collapsing bridges. Neither Primarch noticed the hundreds of warriors watching from below. To ordinary Space Marines, it looked less like combat, more like two natural disasters colliding. Eventually, both warriors landed atop a passing Storm Eagle gunship. The aircraft lurched violently beneath their weight. Its pilot fought desperately to maintain control. Curze attacked first. His claws slashed across Vulkan's chest. The salamander answered with another crushing hammer blow. The Storm Eagle rolled sideways. Warning alarms screamed throughout the cockpit. Crew members desperately tried to stabilize the aircraft. They failed. Curze kicked Vulkan backward. The Primarch stumbled toward the edge of the hull. For one brief moment, he lost his balance. Curze seized the opportunity. With impossible speed, he ripped Guilliman's warhammer from Vulkan's grasp, then hurled it directly into his brother's face. The impact sent Vulkan flying. 30 meters. 40. He crashed through the palace gardens below, disappearing beneath shattered stone. The Storm Eagle spun out of control. Curze abandoned it before it crashed. He vanished into the darkness of Macragge once again. For several long seconds, nothing moved. Then the rubble beneath the palace gardens shifted. A massive armored hand reached upward. Vulkan stood. Broken bones straightened, crushed organs regenerated, fresh skin covered torn muscle. Within moments, the Primarch looked ready to fight again. Around him, stunned Ultramarines lowered their weapons. Many had never witnessed the regenerative gift of a perpetual before. It bordered on the miraculous. Vulkan looked around in confusion. Curze was gone. The hunt had failed. For now. Somewhere beneath the city, the night haunter disappeared into ancient tunnels once more. He had survived. Again. But Macragge was no longer the same. The palace had become a battlefield, its defenders exhausted, its security shattered. And while Guilliman struggled to restore order, 3 more Primarchs were about to stand together for the first time since the heresy began. A meeting that would change the fate of Ultramar forever. For the first time since the Horus Heresy began, 3 loyal Primarchs stood together. Roboute Guilliman, Lion L. Johnson, Sanguinius. Each had survived a different nightmare. Each believed Terra might already have fallen. Each carried the weight of an Imperium that no longer seemed to exist. The Ruinstorm still surrounded Ultramar. No message had reached them from the throne world. No fleet had crossed the storm. For all they knew, the Emperor was dead. Horus had won. If that was true, humanity needed a future. Guilliman presented the only solution he could imagine. Ultramar had survived. Its worlds still stood. Its industries still functioned. Its people still believed. Perhaps a new Imperium could rise here, not to replace the Emperor, but to preserve his dream. The proposal divided the room. Lion L. Johnson hated it. To him, there could only ever be one Imperium, one Emperor, one throne. Creating another empire, even temporarily, felt dangerously close to treason. Sanguinius remained silent. More than either of his brothers, he understood the weight of symbolism. If Terra truly had fallen, someone would have to carry humanity's hope. Eventually, the 3 reached an uneasy compromise. Imperium Secundus was born, not out of ambition, out of desperation. Guilliman became its Lord Warden. The Lion accepted command of its military forces as Lord Protector, and Sanguinius accepted the imperial crown, not because he wanted power, because both of his brothers believed humanity needed a figure who could inspire faith. No one embodied that hope more than the angel. Across Ultramar, the announcement spread quickly. For the first time in years, people believed tomorrow might still exist. But hope has a way of attracting monsters. Far beyond Macragge, another fleet had already seen the light of the Pharos. Not loyalists, night lords. Drawn through the Ruinstorm by the same beacon that had saved so many imperial lives. Their commander was Krukesh the Pale. Beside him stood Gendor Scrivok. Neither cared about Imperium Secundus. Neither cared about Guilliman. Their objective was Sotha, the Pharos. If they could seize the ancient Xenos device, they could control the only beacon piercing the Ruinstorm, the future of the war itself. As Night Lord's strike cruisers emerged from the warp, Sotha's defenders had no idea what was approaching. Barabas Dantioch still worked within the ancient mountain. Alexis Pollux and the Imperial Fists strengthened every defensive position they could. None of them expected the next assault to come from the 8th Legion. None of them realized the battle for the Pharos was about to decide far more than the fate of one world. The Night Lords came without warning. One moment, Sotha was quiet. The next, the sky filled with black warships. Their target wasn't the planet itself. It was the Pharos. Crokesh the Pale understood exactly what the ancient device represented. As long as the beacon remained active, loyalist fleets would continue finding their way through the Ruinstorm. Destroy the Pharos, and Ultramar would become isolated once again. The assault began in orbit. Using stolen Imperial identification codes, Night Lord's boarding craft slipped through Sotha's defenses before anyone realized what was happening. By the time alarm sounded, the orbital station was already under attack. Captain Adalis and his defenders fought desperately to hold the docks. They were overwhelmed. The Night Lords didn't simply kill, they made examples. Bodies were skinned alive. Victims were crucified across bulkheads. Entire corridors became monuments to terror. It was exactly how the sons of Curze preferred to wage war. While Sotha burned above, the real battle unfolded beneath Mount Pharos. Warsmith Barabas Dantioch had spent months studying the ancient Xenos machine. Alongside him stood Alexis Pollux of the Imperial Fists. Iron Warrior and Imperial Fist. Two legions that had once despised each other, now fighting shoulder to shoulder. Together, they transformed the underground complex into a fortress. Every corridor became a kill zone, every chamber a final defensive line. The Night Lords reached them anyway. One position after another fell. Eventually, Crokesh himself entered the heart of the mountain. He didn't come to destroy the Pharos. He wanted to control it, to use its light for the War Master. Dantioch already knew that could never be allowed. There was only one choice left. He turned to Pollux, then placed both hands upon the Pharos controls. He overloaded the machine, not gradually, completely. The ancient engines screamed. Energy flooded through every chamber. Reality itself seemed ready to tear apart. The Night Lords finally realized what was happening. Too late. The Pharos erupted. A wave of impossible energy raced through the mountain. Crokesh and his elite warriors vanished inside the explosion. Machines melted. Stone collapsed. The beacon that had guided countless loyalists simply ceased to exist. At the center of the chamber, Dantioch remained standing for only a few moments longer. The ancient machine had burned through him. Every reserve of strength, every remaining heartbeat. Alexis Pollux caught the old warsmith before he fell. Dantioch smiled. Not because they had won, because they had denied victory to Horus. Then he died. Sotha was saved, but the cost reached far beyond one world. As the last pulse of the Pharos burst into the void, it crossed the darkness between galaxies. Far beyond human sight, far beyond the reach of the Imperium, something ancient stirred. A vast intelligence, endlessly hungry. It turned toward the distant light and began moving. Humanity would not witness the consequences for thousands of years, but history would remember this moment. Because the death of the Pharos had unknowingly called a new enemy to the Milky Way. The Tyranids. And while one nightmare ended, another had already begun.